Okay, how are you doing, guys?
Really well, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm all right. You got the shortest chair, Charley.
I know. It's cool. Madonna, chill out.
Hello, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. This is We the Poets, a poetry podcast that is for you, whether you're a seasoned performer and writer, or whether you are just interested in learning a little bit more about poetry, or you just want to hear some friends chatting nonsense about something that we weirdly decided to dedicate our lives to for very little money. That is what this is. We got Chris in the studio who's sorting things out, and I'm joined by Charley, Genever, and Keely Mills.
Hello.
Yo.
And we're excited. Super excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Super excited. What are we, episode 2 already?
Episode 2, that's right. It was great to speak to Selena, and this time we are meeting with an incredible writer and also a mate of ours, which makes it really lovely because and local. Well, he's a Peterborough.
Peterborough massive.
He's been living here for a little while now. Ross Sutherland. What are you most excited about?
I'm always excited to listen to Ross. How about you, G?
Same. I think, Ross is a massive inspiration for me. I remember seeing Stand By for Take Back Up as one of the first spoken word solo theatre pieces that I'd seen. And it just blew my mind. And then I went on a writing retreat, an Apples and Snakes funded one, which Ross was a tutor on. So I got to spend a good amount of time with him there, and always super inspired by spending time with him.
And came up with one of the best lines ever.
Yes.
But that'll have to be the not suitable for work.
So for context, I wrote a poem on that Arvon writing retreat that is Keely's favourite line that I've ever written, which is not suitable
Charley
for
said
a family-friendly podcast.
No, but it's not suitable for this one. But,
maybe stick around to the end. You might hear it.
If you stick around for the very final episode of this series, we have agreed we're going to have an X-rated final episode, or anything that's been sent in that doesn't make it in for any reason, but also our chance to just kind of...
Can we do X-rated too?
Maybe, yeah. If you got...
Set me that challenge. I will rise to it.
Well, Ross has made many different types of things. That show, Stand By for Take Back Up, just to fill you on what that was about. So the concept of the show is that he's found an old videotape that his grandfather had left behind after his grandfather had passed, and they used to watch videos and films together, and he plays it throughout the duration of an hour-long show, and he recites poetry, and sometimes the tape loops, and there's different cuts between different things, but what he says starts to synchronize with everything on the visual behind him, and once he's pressed play on that tape, it is running, and the poetry and everything synchronizes. There's this kind of game that's played, and he kind of transforms from being a poet into being this kind of multimedia oracle. And we talked about maybe this episode we can chat about transformations, or how we as poets have to transform into different beings and different things. Because we've all done a lot of that, right? We've all had to kind of wear a few different hats. Workshop leaders.
Yeah, project manager, mentor.
Producer. You try and do whatever you can, because I don't think you can make sole money out of just doing poetry. You have to be good at doing lots of different... And also, I feel like that's great as well, because you never get bored.
Yeah,
really.
Absolutely.
You never get bored, but it means that sometimes it can be really tiring too, because you're doing so many different things.
I don't think you can have a scene that really goes with just people reading and performing poems. There's all these other things.
Yeah. I think that's what's really exciting about someone like Ross, for instance, because he experiments on our behalf. So then it kind of inspires you to think, well, how could I push things a little bit out of my comfort zone, or out of other people's comfort zones even.
Yeah. So we're hoping maybe this will inspire us a bit, and hopefully it'll inspire you as well. I'm pretty sure it will. For now, let's hear a piece from someone that's been sent in. Charley.
Yeah.
we've got a great piece that's been sent in by a local poet, right?
Yeah, we do. Shall I introduce it?
Yeah, go for it.
So another good mate of ours. This feels like just the mates podcast. Shouldn't be We the Poets, We the Mates.
It's because poets are so nice to each other universally at all times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Best mates, best friends podcast. So this is a piece by Peterborough-based poet Alex Tyler, who also runs an incredible local night called Good Shout, which you should check out. And this piece, I think, captures childhood, transformations, and Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Morphin time.
Pterodactyl.
Power Rangers was a classic. It had ninjas and high kicks, monsters and sidekicks. It was the shit. Even when I was 6, I knew it was too good for Fox Kids. They were entertainers, kung fu fakers, those primary coloured gladiators. Their popularity was contagious. Saturday morning TV, a no-brainer. Go, go, Power Rangers. I wanted that stardom. To be Angel Grove's Warden of Awesome. I dreamed of action figures, plastic swords and corporate whoredom. Dumbledore, I wanted Zordon. It was, in fact, morphing time, this Blue Ranger angst of mine. It would not stop, not until I could drive a robot Triceratops. This was no fad. So I told my dad of my mad desires and of the dreams I had. He said, son, this obsession is getting stranger. You shame us. You will never be famous. To me, you are the lamest, most heinous failure. You will never be a Power Ranger. I bit my lip, clenched my fist, hissed, what a tit, what did he know about any of this? So I built Alpha 5 out of plasterboard, had a loop of his voice on tape record. I hoarded cardboard, built myself a Megazord. It reached the 2nd floor. The street had never seen its like before. I was in spandex from head to toe, started learning Kung Fu and Taekwondo, got the theme tune played on the radio, and even had a guest slot on the One Show. It was then my father marched on set without a word. Dressed like one of the Thunderbirds, he said, son, I am just like you, except I dreamed of joining International Rescue. Now, I never made it to Tracy Island, but what you've been saying has been proper inspiring. So follow your dreams and you will defeat Rita as one of the elite. Be upbeat and ensure your spandex is on fleek. FAB. And for all those out there with passions like mine, you should go out there and do that thing full time, which sets me up nicely for an ending rhyme. That's right. It's morphin' time.
Thank you so much to Alex Tyler for that great piece to get us started off. And we're excited, right? Because we've got...
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bursted in. We've got Ross Sutherland. If you don't know him already, I guess we've known Ross for a while, right?
Yeah.
He's just down the road.
I mean, you know, I've actually been in Peterborough. It's shockingly long. I still feel like I've only just moved here, but like it's been
How
like
long?
over 10 years now.
Really?
Yeah, I know. But you guys have always made me feel really welcome in Peterborough. It's been actually really, really lovely to move to a city and, you know, and already, meet the poetry community. And everyone's been really nice to me.
We were excited to meet you.
Oh.
We were all like, "You want to take him in now?
I remember.
He's one of us."
I remember meeting you in Bewitched. Like, I'd only just started in the poetry world, and it was when I was going to get funded for Freak Speak, and we had a lovely chat.
Oh.
Lovely chat.
And 10 years, you're qualified to complain about the fountains and everything now.
Wicked.
Yeah,
I've been waiting. Can I write an angry letter to the Peterborough Telegraph about the Christmas tree?
It may well be that you haven't encountered Ross's work before, so...
You probably haven't.
But they might...
I know the poetry world is small, but like... It's okay. That's all right.
Well, maybe it's a good chance for him to introduce himself and tell you a bit about who he is and what he likes to do with his spare time.
Maybe? I mean, to be fair, I've got a newborn, so I don't really have any spare time right now. I've been up since 4:45 in the morning today. So, no, I don't have any spare time. I've been doing poetry on stage since 1995. So that will be my 30-year anniversary of going on stage next year. And I won't bore you with all the details, but I think maybe I've been a full-time writer for the last like 21 of those years, but that does give the false impression that like I've made a living out of writing poetry, and that is absolutely not the case. I mean, poetry has always been an important part of what I do. I would say almost any writing project that I've done as a sort of freelance writer, poetry is like the spine of it. For the first 5 years, all I did was write poetry to perform on stage. Because I was, when I was like 15, I went to see John Cooper Clarke at the Music Box in Edinburgh. And I kind of just thought he was amazing and like so funny. And I think actually that's one of the main things I took was sort of like just how funny he was. It's like a joke in every single line of like a lot of his poems. And that was something that I sort of, I felt like I incorporated into my own writing. Well, basically, in the early days, I'm just ripping him off 100%. I'm just taking John Cooper Clarke poems, filing off his name, and then a couple of the key details, and then passing them off as my own. I'm not the only poet who's done that, by the way. You know, like, he who has not stolen a John Cooper Clarke poem, you know, cast the first stone. So, yeah, the early stuff was very much like that, but also the poetry scene in the 90s, a lot of the stages and spaces are the same places where these alternative comedy is happening. And also a lot of alternative comedy is equally influenced by performance art. And that's influencing the sort of strange cabaret acts that you're getting. And those cabaret acts are appearing both on poetry stages and on like, the comedy stages. So you're getting a lot of acts that are all in character because there's a lot of like actors coming into because it counted as a gig for your equity card doing a performance poetry gig. So there's a lot of comedy and a lot of acting are all sort of like coming into poetry in sort of like the 90s. And also because it's still taking place in like quite rowdy places or places because it's sort of the same cabaret spaces, a lot of it's quite loud and quite sweary and like not very subtle, which was good for me as a 16-year-old like trying to kind of like do stuff. And poetry changes like so much in terms of live poetry changes, you know, in the next like 15 years. By the time it gets like the mid-noughties and people start using the phrase spoken word, it's become so much more intimate and it's more personal. A lot of the stuff that when I was saying wasn't really personal at all, very political, very, very, very funny and angry, but not particularly like personal. And I think there are multiple reasons for that. And I think one of them is like the sort of slow influence of slam. There was sort of competitive poetry, but that's still very live in the States. But then also like YouTube comes along and you get this intimacy of like the webcam, and it really brings poetry into this much more intimate space. And that's the time I start bombing. Because I don't think I necessarily like adapted to as it went along. So things
because a lot of your work still, it often has like a lens on it, or it tilts away from being completely autobiographical, and it kind of tilts into like an alternate reality or a different space. A lot of the
I would say like sometimes I pretend to be autobiographical, and then it just turns out to be just another layer. And like I think sometimes that was just because I write slowly, and sometimes when you work on something like very, very slowly, you think about it too much.
Yeah.
Perhaps sometimes I feel like when you want to be kind of like intimate and kind of real with an audience, something has to come out like quite quickly and quite honestly. But because I'm such a slow writer, after I've been working on something for a couple of days, I'm just like, oh yeah, but what if it really turned out that this was all a character? And I think I overcomplicated stuff. Yeah.
But again, it's like intimate, but it's also
it's
absurd.
Fake. Even now, I fear intimacy. I will get out of anything of actually talking about my actual feelings about something. But yeah, because of when I started, I think there will always be something slightly shouty, slightly silly and sweary, I think, about my writing, to sort of where it came from for me. And I think that sort of persists. And even in the stuff I do, the thing I do most commonly now is I make a monthly podcast, which is a sort of new writing podcast. And some of that is poetry, even though I might not describe it as poetry. It is full of lyric writing and kind of like quite, you know, like dreamlike, sort of like intense pieces of writing sandwiched in between more like essay-based writing. And still to this day, I think like if I get a chance to make a joke, I kind of tend to take it.
But also, you must have had a chance to collaborate a lot, right? Because there's quite a melting pot of loads of different people coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that's another important part of my writing is collaboration. Because I was part of a writing collective for 10 years. We started as a poetry night, and then the residents of the poetry night, we sort of became a sort of collective of poets, and we started doing group sets at like Glastonbury Festival and Edinburgh Fringe. And then eventually we started making theatre shows together. It's called Aisle 16. You can tell we were named in the 90s, can't you? Is there a more 90s coded name
I don't
than
know.
Aisle 16? A word and a number. It feels like...
How did you come up with the name?
It's my fault because it's an in-joke from Sainsbury's where I used to push trolleys in Tollgate in Essex. We used to joke that when if someone came up to you and you didn't know where it was, you just go, Aisle 16, and then like walk away. That was the joke, that you just sent everybody to Aisle 16. So it sort of felt good because when we first started, we didn't feel like we belonged in any other poetry night. We'd sort of go to the more serious night and I'd think we were just a bunch of clowns. And, you know, like, but then we go to a comedy night and we would just not be funny enough. So like we were looking for our own space. And so that's where the name came from. I wasn't thinking about Sum 41 or Eiffel 65. That was not on my mind. If I had, I might have had pause. Yeah, working closely with other writers, I think made a huge difference. Being part of a collective, you've broadened your skill set, you know, in terms of the kinds of things you think you might be capable of doing. And, you know, you get to be inspired by other writers and jealous of them too. I think that sort of competitive spirit of got to up my game now, you know, when somebody suddenly like pulls something out of the hat. But also me and the rest of R16, our numbers changed over time, but it usually about like 5 other writers usually on tour with us. And we knew each other's work so well that whenever anyone made like the tiniest change, we'd be able to kind of like talk about it afterwards. And I think that having people who you can kind of bore with the sort of like the intimacies of your own writing craft, I think was like really, really useful. So yeah, the collaboration was definitely one of the big things. And if I had to say one more of like a thing that kind of characterizes my work, I would probably say, and probably this is the most important one, which is I tend to approach each new project, whether it's a poem or something else, as a game. The biggest spark of inspiration for me actually goes into deciding like the rules of this new game that I'm going to be playing. Now, once I've got like the rules of like the thing, like, and they're good, I'm pretty confident that the piece will kind of just write itself. For example, I wrote a play that is just one long palindrome. So it ends exactly as it begins and it changes direction like halfway through. But as soon as I'd set the rules for like how that thing was going to work, so much of the story was immediately...
So this is Party Trap, right?
It's called Party Trap.
So good.
You see what I did there?
Yeah. And so just to clarify, the first line of the play is also the last line.
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm not doing it letter by letter. It is line by line. So the first sentence is the same as the last sentence. But I get to choose when I break a sentence, so I can still break something down in the slightly smaller sort of units if I need to. As soon as you start working on that, if you find something that works for both the first scene and the last scene, guess what? It's going in the play. Because I'm unlikely to find a second one that's going to fulfill both those criteria. So many of the options are sort of removed. That's an extreme example, but like that is kind of how I like to write. And, you know, like to give examples from my podcast, because I make a new one of these every month. So I get to try out a lot of different things on my podcast. But one I did recently was I set a challenge of writing a novelization of a fight scene from a Jackie Chan film. So it had to document every single punch and kick, every single movement on screen for a certain period of time. So that requires you got to develop a certain poetic style in order to kind of do that economically. And then I wrote another one recently, which was like a heist story where I picked the heist crew using the random article button on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So you just had to keep plugging it until it gave me 6 people who were alive, and then they were my crew. And I designed the heist around the skills of that particular crew set. So like all this stuff, all this game playing, it's all emphasizing like structure over content. It's almost, I started to become almost like puritanical about it. Like I saying like things like, I don't care about content. I just care about like coming up with the rules and then efficiently and finding a solution to it. And the work is just a byproduct of the experiment.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be a poem anymore. So it started off with poetry.
No, that is it. Yeah. So because the core of all of this, of course, is something that we all do. Anytime I've ever written like a sonnet or a haiku, like all poetry at one point or another, all poets have worked within these kind of parameters where you're doing this interplay, this tension between content and form. All right, and it is exactly that. It's just taking that dynamic and then just. You take off the outside coat that calls it a poem, and then you can kind of take that energy and kind of do anything with it. And for me, and this is where this all comes from for me, it was in finding the Oulipo. The Oulipo was a French writing collective. I say found them, they weren't like in my closet. They're a French writing collective in the 1960s. And it was like an anti-surrealist movement or kind of in response to surrealism. And they loved flooding their work with rules. They thought the sonnet was played out and the sestina was played out. They wanted looking for like new poetic forms. And this was very much like their philosophy that was just like make new games. And they saw it as a sort of like a fundamentally charitable act, just giving these new forms to people to kind of to play with and kind of find new stuff with. And that I found them in my 20s, and as soon as I heard about them, it was just like a lightning bolt. I think then suddenly all of my anxiety about, what should I get on stage and talk about just like disappeared because that's not my concern anymore. And you might think that writing using these stupid rules just turns out gibberish, you know, but actually sometimes by making it so hard to write, you have to go so deep inside yourself to find the solution that you end up saying something like insanely personal, but hell, you had to say it because it was the only thing that fit the rules. And then suddenly you're spilling out some of the most intimate things I've said on stage, and this is someone who is not an intimate writer, have been through this process of just like the rules made it so hard for me to say anything else apart from the truth, and then it just sort of came out.
Has anyone else had a go at trying to write using any of the Oulipo forms? Because I've done N+7, which I think is a really cool one.
N+7, that's you take an existing piece of writing and and you replace every noun and verb with the word 7 places below it in a dictionary.
Wow.
Yeah. They often don't do proper nouns, but you can do as I remember like Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo becomes roof, roof, wherefore art thou roof. Students I work with really like it because deny thy father, I can't remember what that is, but, and refuse thy name, but name became nappy, and they really enjoyed that in relation to Romeo because they felt he was quite childish compared to Juliet. But Ross, you've written using N+7, you did N+23 with Little Red Riding Hood.
That was one of the first ones I did. I took Little Red Riding Hood and I replaced it with 23 words below in the dictionary, and that becomes liverish, red-blooded, riff-raff, hoo-ha.
Wow.
But the great bit is that Grandma becomes Great Britain, so it feels like this weird political tract.
Mouth becomes MPs. So what horribly great big MPs you have, all the better to echo you with.
Yeah. What great big eyewitnesses you have, all the better to segregate you with. Then there you go.
It was so Darwinian inside the it's a great piece. But maybe
I can do that with, like 5-year-olds. That's what I love about it. I can do that on stage, and being able to have a poem that will kill with the reception class is really lovely.
That's cool. Maybe you could read us a piece that's been inspired by the Oulipo.
Yeah, I would love to. So I'm going to read the Univocalism. A univocalism is a poem that only contains one vowel. So this is my univocalism in the key of O. So only uses O. And when I first started, like I've been sort of saying, like I didn't know what the poem was going to be about. I was just kind of like just putting down O words, like Snoop Doggy Dog, Toronto bookshop. And then sort of slowly over time, things started to come together and you start to see what the text is underneath that you're pulling together. And I was like, oh, I'm actually telling a sort of pseudo autobiographical story about something that happened to me many, many times when I was growing up, which is that going out with your mates and getting so wasted that you couldn't find your way home again. Which weirdly does feel like a good metaphor for the process of writing univocally. Because it's being lost in a familiar place. Anyway, so this poem is called Two Moons. Because you get it, right? It's only got O's. All right, just checking. Frosty boys, bosh shots of scotch on London Common. Rock off to soppy monotoss. Lost songs of London. Town of bop. No motor. No lolly, no job to mock, from tons of pot down to John's bong only. Too strong for Tony, only Tony don't know so. Gordon's cold brown cosh of old hot dog now looks so good. Tony scoffs lot. Sods off to look for polos. Johnny shows Gordon how to body pop. Slow Robocop foxtrot to Bobby Brown. 2:00. Tony growls Bon Mot torch songs from London's soft throng of woods. Lost moth for God's 2 moons. Poor Tony looks down, drops pollock on both boots. On plots so holy. Old dogs poo boldly. Goons do loops of blocks, too cold for words. Gaudy pops bonbons. John spots Bono. Both gobs go oh. There we go.
Yay!
Good work.
I know it's got Y in it. Don't write in. I know it's got Y. It's not a proper vowel. So I did it to a room full of people from the Oulipo because they're still going today.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to expand their numbers. There's still the same amount of people. They have to fit around a medium-sized dining table. That's one of the restrictions of being in the Oulipo. And they came to London for the anniversary of the translation of Life, a User's Manual by Georges Perec. Me and my friends got to do a couple of his poems, and one by one, every single member of the Oulipo came up to us over the course of that night and went, I liked your poem, but you used Y as a vowel.
No.
Like nothing as trivial as content could have offended them. We give ourselves the power of Y, the lubricating power of Y.
What's the weirdest act that you've ever gone on after? This is not for the podcast, this is for me.
So I was at Secret Garden Party and I was kind of nervous and it was cabaret, I didn't know what to expect. And the guy on before me, he was playing some kind of music, but it was this really epic Flight of the Valkyries kind of music that... And he sits down, he puts a laptop out and he starts very clearly looking at some porn. We can't see what he's looking at, but he's like getting all this kind of like moisturizer out and everything else as he's kind of getting himself set up. And then it really kicks off the music and he starts making use of all this stuff behind the desk and the laptop. As it kind of builds up, everyone starts cheering and clapping and he's getting happier and happier. And he's like, puts one leg up on the table at one point, and then when it hits the climax of the music, just foam, like white foam, flies up from behind the desk,
Brilliant.
covers him,
Brilliant.
sprays out like really high, about like 10 feet up in the air, and he's just lying back, and it's kind of going, everyone's going, "Rah!" like cheering.
And so this was
and then it
Sandra
kind of
Motion.
Sorry?
Sound
And
emotion.
then, yeah, so
Quite
this-
like-
Yeah, I've seen that one. I've seen that one.
and they had to like kind of like mop away all the white foam and stuff as I was going on stage. And it was really good fun to go on afterwards. But yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
My gigs have been quite plain in comparison to that. I don't have anything that tops that.
You've shaved your head.
Yeah,
on
very
stage.
recently shaved my head on stage for just a work in progress. I love stuff that takes poetry but then does something really unexpected with it. So really it's like a monologue, but the minute just lists loads of like numbers and stats about my life in like days or like percentages just while I'm shaving my head.
Will you say these things? Or?
Yeah. So it's the premise is really about like time as a construct and exploring like what happens when we let our minds run wild. It's about like preparing for war or preparing for like defiance and disobedience. But most of the crowd didn't know I was going to do it. So there was like an audible gasp when I got the
that's
clipper
lovely.
out and then started. It was
like
great.
that.
It was really great. And because it was a work in progress as well, it was really good to just test it out. But I couldn't rehearse it because it's like one take. And then, so yeah, it was good though. It was good fun.
I've got a question for Ross, because once we talked about like themes within our work, and you talked about time being a theme in your work.
Yeah, I think a lot of stuff has accidentally been about time. Like I did one show which was trapped in a 7-minute time loop.
So I went to this.
Really?
Yeah,
I
So
yeah.
think I went to it as
It's
well.
called Comedian Dies in the Middle of a Joke.
Yes.
It is a
Oh.
reconstruction, a fake reconstruction. This isn't based on a true story of a murder in a comedy club where somebody shot the comedian on stage, and everybody in the room gets to play someone in the story. So the audience is the cast, including the comedian on stage, because you read your set off an auto cue.
But you kind of, the comedians having like their worst ever gig as well. Right?
Yeah, that was important because basically, because it's a 7-minute time loop. After 7 minutes, everything, we go back in time, everything resets, everybody moves to a different position. So new person playing the comedian, everybody's in a different role in the room that night. Yeah, and so you're going to have like a bunch of people, maybe like 7 people are going to get to be the comedian over the course of the night. And I had to stress at the start of the shows, please don't try and make this material funny, because it gets really, really awful if people will try and make
Yeah.
material
And they're
good.
reading the same material, right? So you
exactly
all
the
know
same
that you're getting the same
scripts.
stuff. You were at a different, so every 7 minutes we all moved
Yeah.
to a different part of the room.
Yeah.
And there would be little unusual things we'd notice from where we sat. Maybe something would
Yeah.
happen from our table, or you'd get some kind of
Yeah.
info.
So there's a bunch of small roles. Okay, let's get into it. I try. I know. So like one person is like, you're like a German stand-up comedian and you've come to steal the show.
Yeah.
So you can take it back to Germany and you've got a dictaphone. And if you hear something funny, you've got to like record it onto your dictaphone. So I've got this dictaphone tape at the time with lots of people doing terrible German accents, kind of like saying things into it.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, there's like, and dotted around the room, there's heckler positions. And that's the only thing that changes over the course of the time loop, is it says, there's a menu in front of that person that says, when the comedian says this line, heckle. You can say anything you want. All right. And what happens is that as the hour progresses, everybody learns the show. And so the heckles get funnier and funnier because you know what's coming after the heckle. So because you've got the gift of prescience, you're able to sort of set up the comedians so they look even stupider in terms of like their response to the thing.
Yeah.
How much of that was like in your head as a concept, and how much of it developed as you were like making the work?
The text itself was something that had to be developed. I started off, I thought I needed more plants than I did. So to begin with, there was me and there's like 4 actors, because I thought we had to put people at certain positions to keep the thing on rails. And what we all discovered as a cast is we could start taking those people out. You didn't need to have that. But we wrote the script together and road tested it. But the concept of like the club and all of that pretty much just came, that was there from the very, very beginning. Because you see, that's all structure. That's how, you know, things sort of work for me. And I still think of that as a poem. You know, like every single rotation,
Really?
every sort of like 7-minute rotation, that's a verse of the poem. It's going to have exactly the same structure every single time you go through it, but you're going to change certain elements of it. It's just a live, breathing poem that you are writing, and you have to keep finding new ways of saying the same thing again and again and again.
So I guess it's interesting you say that that's a poem in your head, because a lot of ways, I think when I chat with people about poetry, they said they're not a poet. Even if they've written a poem, someone will go, oh, I'm not a poet though. And I think that we have this kind of very heavy, granite-like perception of what a poet is. That it's a very heavy, weighty word that you can't use. But I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like when I'm doing my work, it's like it's not solid and granite and stone.
Yeah.
I'm wearing loads of different hats. I mean, we've all kind of come through the live performance circuit. I feel like I draw on comedy, storytelling. Being a teacher helps sometimes, because you're kind of playing the role as a teacher. I don't know, do you guys ever feel tired? Right? Like
Yes. In a word, yes.
I mean, it is the great thing about poetry is that it is an unstable art form. Right? It does not have like a central pillar to it. I think, you know, like, and I mean, I think you can say the same about written publishing traditions. Although, I don't know, maybe in published poetry, there is more an idea of like, there is more framework for, you know, if you want to win awards as like a poet, maybe that sort of pulls you towards a particular voice and register of doing it. But in the sort of live poetry, it's just the wild west of just like chuck anything at the wall and see if it fits. But what I love about that, because it is an unstable art form, that means that it is capable of incredible explosions. If you just tinker a little bit with the formula of like performing arts, you suddenly create this new act that feels like it's in its own different art form, you know, like. And
I also think as well, like poets originally, they were there to record and reflect on society. So therefore, we can't stay as one thing. We have to keep moving and transforming ourselves because society is. So to just be one thing all the time just wouldn't work. And not only that, not everybody's going to like one form of writing or one form of poetry. I think poetry isn't sacred. And I think people like to think that it is, but it's not. I don't think it is.
It's rough and ready.
Yeah.
Gritty. Like, we've both got excerpts of poems, well, all of us, I think, as murals. I've got a poetry outfit that's got a poem printed all over it that is just an outfit that I just wear sometimes to gigs. But I think, like, I think there's so much scope. And like you say, that instability allows you to just take what you want and be like, yeah, it's a poem.
I think sometimes there is a sort of perspective of like, you can be a poet on stage and just like not be doing performance. If you're like reading from a book and you're like, oh, don't applaud in between, thank you. Right. And it's just like, well, actually, you're still making a huge amount of dramaturgical decisions in how you're presenting yourself here, right? You're still like, you've brought your book on stage as like a prop.
Yeah, you thought about your status, like through how you're carrying yourself.
Yeah, right. If you're telling your audience not to like applaud in between, like you're changing your dynamic with the audience. In fact, these are stagecraft like decisions that like affect the performance. I think really just the longer anybody spends on stage, the more you realize how many other different types of act are passing through that stage on any one week of the year, and how much you've got to learn from them.
I think hosting gives you a lot of that as well, though, right? We've all hosted. Charley and Keely, you've hosted a lot. You're kind of resetting the room. You're doing all this.
Yeah.
You got to clean up all of Andrew Motion's jizz.
There's a lot.
There is a lot. I mean, it is. What a gosh.
I think the job of a host is about kind of like gaining the trust, gaining the attention back of the room, and then giving that attention over to the next act that's coming on. So that's how I kind of started off, really.
Yeah. One of the first times I think you asked me to host Pint of Poetry, I overthought it to the nth degree. I was like, so I wasn't really listening to anyone else. I was just thinking about what I could say next and just writing little notes. And it was kind of poetry. But through figuring out that was way too much, it just helps you relax and just kind of figure out what is an authentic way for you to command the room and hype people up.
I think you can tell those poets, though, that have been through that kind of training, because they're able to somehow get a room to concentrate in on them and to calm a room down, whether they're being absurd or being funny, or I think they're able to deal with that. And I've never found with those type of poets, I've had to say to an audience, can you be quiet? You know, because they're performing.
You definitely pick up like little tips and tricks of which poems definitely work in that environment and which ones definitely won't.
Yeah, and there is nothing better than like starting a poem and it's like really rowdy room, and then by the time it gets to like the final verse, everybody shut up. And I think like that's probably only happened like once, but like
come on, it's happened more than that.
And maybe it's happened twice. You know, I always thought, because every like 5 years or so, someone talks about like, we should make like a film about the poetry scene, you know, and you know, and the idea is always seems to be, let's get a huge venue, much bigger than poets usually play, and let's get the biggest poet that we can get our hands on, and let's have like a sycophantic audience come and like cheer, and that will be an indicator of what the scene's like. And it's like, well, it isn't really.
No, exactly.
It would be so much better to film gigs like that, to basically take a camera, take it around, because you do so many different weird. You'll do like one day it would be like, you know, it's an old people's home, you know, or like it's or it's like someone's, you know, it's like a really like dry, dusty, like literary night.
I think poetry does. People think it fits in everywhere, don't they? Like from funerals to weird places.
And they're often wrong. But that makes, I think that makes good TV, you know, because actually it's kind of interesting. I think our malleable sort of nature in fitting into different like spots, I think it gives us a lot of our most interesting stories. And even if the gigs themselves aren't great, I don't think I would trade it up, you know.
For now, let's have a listen to something sent in by a listener. We've got James Domestic. He recorded an ace piece for us when we did Right Club Open Mic. So we let him know about this series. And when we told him we were going to talk about maybe transformations in all the different hats we have to wear as poets, he sent us a poem that he'd written about observing people having to wear an awful lot of hats and do an awful lot of different things whilst on holiday. Here's James Domestic with Ersatz Flamenco.
Ersatz Flamenco in the hotel bar. Something for the tourists, they don't go far. Because it's all inclusive, you can get pissed on the cheap and collapse on a lounger by the pool in a heap. Ersatz Flamenco, they're all clomping about. With hearts not quite in it, they look proper burnt out. Those two were on reception from breakfast today. Their hooves must be killing them while they're shouting, "Olé!" Ersatz Flamenco has the turns and the claps of proper flamenco, but it's just a bit crap. It's like a school production. It doesn't quite gel. They're under-rehearsed and it's not hard to tell. Ersatz Flamenco, if you look close, you'll see each smile hides a grimace as they prance clumsily. I lay no blame at the performer's door. So many damn acts they can't think anymore. Reception and bar work, pool games, archery, they're mentally and physically out of their trees. Ersatz Flamenco just stomping around in fancy costumes for an indifferent crowd. Sore trotters and calves from a 15-hour day, and tomorrow from 7 they'll do it again. Ersatz Flamenco, no passion or reason, just staff battling on till the end of the season.
Thank you so much, James Domestic, for that really entertaining piece that I think sums up how we feel, maybe sometimes, or sometimes sums up how we might look to other people sometimes, trying to juggle all these different roles. Did you like the piece?
Yeah.
What an amazing voice. If James doesn't have a voices.com account for him being able to do voiceover work. He's missing a trick. He's got a fantastic voice. No, I love the poem. It's great.
Yeah. I like hearing poems in that type of voice as well. Yeah, I loved it.
And the language as well was super casual in like a really relatable way.
Hoofs.
Yeah, everything about it just pulling in a direction that makes you kind of want to hear more. And if you want to hear more from James Domestic, we'll put a link in the description to his new collection of poetry. You should definitely check out. Okay, so I think one of the things we've been talking about is transformations and wearing all these different hats and whether it makes us feel tired or whether it helps us work the system and find other things that we can do.
Sure. Work the system. Well, I mean, I think just creatively, some of the most interesting stuff happens at the boundary between two art forms, right? You know, I think it's something that's always quite nice to try and do is to say, all right, so I've got this thing here. What happens if I take this exact artwork, but then try and move it into a different genre? First of all, it's because also I'm lazy. Right, so if I can take the same piece of work, but then try to like reimagine it, because I've already gone through the hard work of having the creative idea. Right? I've already made it once, right? And you kind of, some things are easy to solve when you're trying to move something into a different genre, but then some things suddenly get really complicated. For example, I'll do like an exercise with students sometimes where you get like an existing poem and you're like, oh, write me the opposite poem to that. Just take it and make the opposite. And people will approach that in different ways because you don't give them any more guidance. And some will do it line by line. It'll be like the meaning of the line will be reversed. Some it'll be more like concept by concept or word by word. But whatever approach, they're going to run into problems. Because some things are easy. You're like, oh, up, that's down. Love, that's hate. But then you go like, oh, apple, what's that? You know, what's the opposite of an apple? Banana or humpback whale. I don't know. You know, suddenly it gets kind of like tricky. But
that's cool. If you're listening to this and you want to try that, that's one option you could always go for.
I recommend giving it a go.
Yeah. Be interested to do it with I don't know why. I thought of like is it The Eagle by Tennyson? Because it's quite a short piece, right? What is the opposite of The Eagle by Tennyson? Is it a really nice creature, or is it something that's not even alive? Like, what would you come up with? I don't know. That's cool.
I was more thinking about doing like doing opposite of each other's poem. Like I do an opposite of one of your poems, and
that's
that'd be
kind
quite
of cool.
fun.
What a cool exchange! Yeah,
we could. Yeah,
me and the Grist looking at each other, eyeing each other up. Yeah, but you rhyme. You do a lot of really good rhymes. I'm not a rhymer.
And then what you do is you both do the poem on the same bill. And one of you wears all black and one of you wears all white. And then in the end, you fight.
Yeah.
You've done this. So the thing that blows our minds is that you wrote an opera.
Yeah, I wrote... So the story of that, and I think this is nice because it does tie back to the...
And not just a small... But it's been in the national press. It's got really good...
So it's just finished its run at the Royal Opera House.
What?
I cannot believe I'm saying this. Right?
That is amazing.
Yeah, so the genesis of it, right, is that I got an email from the musician Sarah Anglis, all right, and she'd seen me on just a mixed bill of poets. I'd done a gig in Brighton, actually a gig that went terribly. Everything went wrong. We nearly pulled it, but I'm so glad I didn't. Because Sarah was one of like the 3 people in the audience that night, I think, who came to see that show. She emailed me and she said, I'm planning to apply for this opera writing fellowship. It's run by the Jizz Foundation, or it used to be. And she already had the idea. She wanted to write an opera about this guy, Charles Byrne, who was an Irish vaudeville performer, who was known as the Irish Giant because he had giantism. And this is back in like 1783, I think. And after Charles Byrne died, his corpse was stolen by the surgeon and anatomist John Hunter and was put in John Hunter's museum, which was originally John Hunter's house. So his skeleton was put on display, despite it being expressly against Charles's wishes. He wanted to be buried at sea. This was a really sad story. And at the time that we were talking about this, that skeleton was still on display in the Hunterian Museum. Sarah had this idea. Neither of us knew anything about writing opera. I'd been once to the opera, actually in person. So, yeah, we did not feel like we belonged in that space at all, you know, like, but luckily we got on the fellowship and We had some great conversations with composers and singers who really helped and tell us, oh, this is what I like. You know, here's the things that I like. It's not even necessarily an example of like, this is a good opera or a bad opera. Here's what I wish when I got to sing, I got to do more of. And that stuff was just like incredibly useful. And the one thing I discovered, tenors often are in this sort of reedy vocal range, so you often try to give them a lot of E sounds for this, because and baritones, because everyone falls in love with a baritone, right? And so you want to give like the baritone for the voice, you want to give it these round, chocolatey vowel sounds. So you often write them in O's.
So the Oulipo work,
right? So the univocalisms that I've been writing, effectively, what it's really doing is it's just taking those particular vowels and it's giving them personality. And actually is going that like actually these sounds like they come with certain archetypes, you know, theatrical archetypes that you can kind of like use and play with. And I've been doing these univocalisms for so long that kind of working in that way was already quite familiar to me. And you combine that with some of like the dramaturgical work that I'd done in having to take my kind of poetry and turn it into extremely low budget black box fringe theatre, you know, like, but still like having to work out how to create a story structure for an hour-long piece of theatre, and just thinking about beginnings, middle and ends, and putting those things together. And I was like, actually, I do have a rudimentary toolbox already for writing a libretto. And I think as soon as I kind of came to that realization, all of the fear just kind of like left, you know. Suddenly it was just like, oh yeah, look, I like everything is connected, right? And one of the beautiful things about writing poetry is that you're constantly rubbing up against all these different forms of language, forms of performance, and you know, you just accidentally hoover up so much stuff like along the way, a bit like that poem we just listened to. It's just like, I'm not an expert in anything, but we've learned enough about a little bit about everything along the way to mean that we can have a shot at anything.
And also to look confident while we're doing it.
Being a poet teaches you, if not how to like pretend that you're high status.
Absolutely, and that you don't care.
So if people want to check out the opera, is it going to be, do you know where it's going next?
Our fingers are crossed for more performances, but if people followed me on social media, then I will I'll be posting about that as and when I kind of know.
That's
so
cool.
Yeah, so my at Ross G Sutherland. I'm so good at self-promotion. You can tell that I've been doing this for 30 years. Right?
What's the next project then?
Are you allowed to say?
I'm potentially making an escape room.
No way.
I'm just talking right now. That might happen in Amsterdam. Making an escape room. And apart from that, yeah, mostly working on my podcast, Imaginary Advice, is back from hiatus. Took a year's hiatus. Just had my 100th episode. And it's all new writing every single month. I try and give myself like a new writing experiment to play with. And and so if you if you're looking for a new audio drama podcast in your life, then come check it out.
No, it's great to listen to in the bath.
Oh, you're good bath podcast. That's great. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that. I think the bath is like a high. That's a high stake. One guy contacted me recently in New Zealand to say that he kind of listens to the podcast when he walks home from his bar job at like 3 a.m. through the city.
Whoa.
And I was like, I'm right for you. You're my ideal audience.
If you want to check out another poetry podcast, you really should check out Imaginary Advice. It's amazing. But if you want to write something and send it in to us, we would love to hear what you've got. So if you want to focus on a particular letter that means something to you, or maybe you want to focus on a univocalism that you'd like to try and write and send it through either MP3s or WAV files, send them over to mark@wethepoets.com and we will listen to them. And even if we can't get them in the next episode, we will try, particularly if they're a bit saucy, to put them into our X-rated one at the end of the series. It's been amazing. Thanks so much for coming in and joining us.
That was brilliant.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And all that remains is to wrap up. So thank you so much, Chris, for everything you've done in the studio, occasionally waving and scowling and pointing out that we're going way. Oh, he's flexing right now. You can't see it. Charley, Keely, do you want to say anything to close out?
No, I feel super inspired. I'm definitely actually going to go home and write, I think.
Yeah, me too, actually. Yeah.
And apart from that, we just hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. And thanks once again for Ross for coming in. Hooray! This podcast has been made by me, Mark Grist, Keely Mills, Charley Genever, and Chris Barn at Backland Studios. Our special guest was Ross Sutherland, and we are very grateful that we get to make this series with public funding from Arts Council England. Thanks so much for listening.